Chapter 309, Activating the Defensive System 1. Clang! Clang! Following Gorlors, soon the sound of metal being pounded sounded. The air became hotter, and the pungent smell lingering in the atmosphere became even more pervasive. My face twisted slightly as a result. That is clang. The heavy sound of the metal being pounded became louder as we neared the location. As a result, I had a hard time understanding what Gorlors was trying to say. What did you say? I raised my voice. What I'm trying to, clang. Once again, his voice was drowned out by the sound of metal being pounded. Finally, fed up, Gorlors grabbed my shoulder and pointed towards the distance where an enormous building stood. Is that the place? I slowly mouthed with my mouth, to which he nodded his head. Raising my hand and giving him an okay sign, I saluted Gorlors and separated from him. The only reason why he was accompanying me was because he wanted to apologize for his earlier actions. He didn't actually need his weapon repaired, so once he brought me to the location, we separated. Arriving before the large building, I put my hand on the handle of the glass door and pushed it open. Clank. Entering the building, the heat intensified, and droplets of sweat started to fall from the side of my face. The interior of the building followed a minimalistic style. There were no signs of any other decorations besides a reception and a couple of sofas. Behind the reception was a young dwarven girl who greeted me with a smile. Welcome, what would you? It's you, human. Just as she was about to greet me, she was cut off by another dwarf. Instantly her eyes opened wide, and she bowed her head. Sir Malval. Malval? Hearing a familiar voice, I turned my head and spotted Malval, the blacksmith I had met before. Wiping his forehead with a white towel, he dropped it by the reception counter and asked, "What be ye doing here?" Tapping on my bracelet, I flashed my worn-down sword. Trying to get this fixed. To be honest, the sword was not very good, and the only reason I was using that was because I did not know that we were about to face a war. I would have bought a new one if I had known. Taking the sword, Malvin scowled as he examined it. Slashing it around, the scowl on his face grew. Turning his head, he asked, "You want to get this trash fixed?" Yes. Though true, his words were a bit harsh. It's pretty heavily damaged. Fought quite a bit. Killed 17 demons and a baron ranked 1 with it. This was only natural. Clank. Clank. Tossing the sword to the side as though it was garbage, Malvin's face became serious. Turning to face me, he suddenly asked, "Do you really want to improve your swordsmanship?" Seeing how serious he was, my back straightened. Yes. No ounce of hesitation was in my voice when I answered. What kind of question was that? Of course, I wanted to. Recalling what I had been through for the past few months, my mind became even firmer. Never again did I want to feel so helpless. Malval and I locked eyes for the next couple of seconds before he sighed and turned around. All right, wait for me here. HM? Where are you going? Unfortunately, before I could even ask, he had already disappeared to the back. Looking at the similarly clueless receptionist, I gave up. Fortunately, the wait did not last for long. Within 5 minutes of leaving, he soon came back with an object covered by a white cloth. The outline looked like that of a sword. My eyes instantly lit up. Is he planning on giving me a sword? My heart started to beat with excitement. Arriving before me, Malval directly handed me the sword. Take it. Is this? Yes, it's a sword. My eyes lit up. Taking the object and feeling it in my hand, I soon unwrapped the white cloth covering it. Once I unwrapped it, just as Malval had said, a sword appeared in my hand. At the sight of the sword, my mouth opened slightly. Alternating my gaze between the sword and Malval, I asked, "Am I supposed to use this?" "Correct." Malval nodded with an amused smirk on his face. "Is this a joke?" Staring at the sword in my hand, I didn't know what to say. Although I did not have high expectations when he brought out the sword, I didn't think he would bring me an old blunt sword that looked like it could crumble at the slightest touch. Hoo. Taking a deep breath, I calmed myself down. There had to be a good reason for this. "May I ask why you gave me the sword?" With his arms crossed, Malval bluntly replied. "Ads by Pub Future. I asked you if you wanted to improve your swordsmanship, is that correct?" "Yes." That was exactly what I asked for. How was this crappy sword going to help? "If you want to get stronger, the sword be the answer." Pointing at the sword, Malval explained. "By using this sword, you will learn how to properly control your power. From how broken your previous sword was, I can tell that you're not efficiently using it. A good swordsman treats their sword as though it be their treasure." Picking up my old worn-out sword, he placed it on the table and pointed towards the right side of it, where a large crack appeared. "Just look at this. This was most likely a result of ye parrying incorrectly. Ye show ye cushioned a bit of the damage by either moving the sword back or redirecting the attack, and this." Listening to Malval's words attentively, unbeknownst to me, my head subconsciously nodded every time he spoke. Every word he said, though harsh, was correct. What shocked me the most was that he was able to point out the flaws with my sword style just by looking at the sword. Before long, I came to a sudden understanding. I understand. Tracing my finger on the sword he had given me, I realized what his intention was when he gave it to me. By trying my best not to crack the sword, he was trying to get me to improve the way I used the sword. Less wasted movements and more efficient ones. As well as more efficient parries. As long as I did those, my sword should never break. Once I achieved that, it meant that I had mastered the basics. "Thank you." Thanking Malval, I reached to grab my old sword. However, before I could do that, I was stopped by Malval, who grabbed my wrist. "What are you doing?" I tilted my head. Slapping my hand, Malval coldly said, "Put that down." What?" Pointing at the blunt sword in my hand, he said. "You're only allowed to use that sword. Nothing else. But what if it breaks due to my mistake? Since this was the first time I was trying this method, I'd be in trouble if the sword broke, even more so if many demons surrounded me." Unfortunately for me, Malval did not seem to care, as he indifferently replied, "Tough luck, I'll see you again once I die of old age." Once again, I was left speechless. Was he really trying to send me on the battlefield with just one sword? Seriously? Taking my sword, Malval put it in his dimensional space. "The best way to fight be to fight without reassurance. If you do it that way, you'll be forced to improve since your life be on the line." All right, fine. Eventually, I gave up and agreed. What he was doing was for my benefit. If what he said really worked, then I might as well just follow it. "Thank you for today, Before I could finish speaking, Malval once again cut me off. "Wait, what be ye doing?" "I'm leaving." I gave Malval an odd look. What else would I be doing? Since I had already gotten the sword, it was now time for me to leave. Raising his hand, Malval opened his palm and pinched his fingers. "That would be 80 achievements points for the sword, please." At that moment, for a moment, just a moment, I envisioned a future where Malvin didn't exist. Why? Perhaps because the world's plot armor protected Malvol, the sirens started to ring at the exact moment I envisioned a world without him. Unaware of what I was thinking, Malvin's face darkened. Putting both of his hands on my back, he pushed me out of the building. Go, pay me back once you come back from this fight. Before he could push me out of the building, I screamed. Wait, I need something else. What is it? He shouted in annoyance. Not minding his attitude, I asked. Can you perhaps give me? Dasha. The rain continued to plummet down from the sky, obstructing everyone's vision. How is the situation? Two dwarves were looking at the situation from a small operating room in an unknown location in the city. One of them had both of his hands pressing on the table, looking through the video images of the walls. He had fiery red hair and wore a brown apron. The other dwarf stood behind the red-haired dwarf with folded arms. He appeared to be in his middle ages. His long back hair was braided behind his back, and his white beard also had a couple of braids by the side of it. Unlike the other dwarf, he had a serious disposition, as his brows always locked into a frown. The dwarf with a serious disposition opened his mouth. The situation be nae good, the weather be too erratic. Fighting now put us at a disadvantage. The red-haired dwarf nodded his head in agreement. You're right. Fighting in these conditions put us at a severe loss. Both dwarves agreed on the fact that fighting with this weather was simply impossible. It would lead to too many losses. The red-haired dwarf walked towards the middle of the room where a large yellow beacon stood. Seems like we have nae choice but to activate the defensive system. Go ahead, I've already reported it to the others. Good, I'll start. Ding. Pressing his hand on the beacon, a defiant yellow hue discharged from the beacon. A glaring red, 100%, appeared in the middle of the beacon, and a homing sound soon sounded. Om. Before long, a bright yellow light shot towards the sky from the beacon. Rushing towards the northern tower, Orimdis, the dwarf responsible for the northern tower, shouted loudly towards his communication device. What? You're planning on activating the defensive system this early into the war? Shoo. Suddenly a bright light shot towards the sky. Once the light reached a certain point, each of the towers on the walls shook and multiple yellow lights soon shot out as well, converging with the light coming from the beacon, forming a bright yellow ball in the middle of the sky. Once the lights converged, a thin transparent yellow film started extending from the yellow ball, enveloping the entire mountain. Shh! *T. Lowering the hand that held the communication device, Ordimus cursed. Looks like they activated the defensive system. Running up the stair of the tower and arriving at the top of the walls, I gazed towards the distance, through the gap of the battlements. Though the heavy rain was obstructing most of my vision, it did not cover the yellow film that was slowly enveloping the mountain. Ren, you're finally here. A familiar voice sounded from behind me. Leopold, you rested enough?
Yeah.
Leaning on the gap in between the battlements, Leopold's hair slowly started to get wet from the rain. Looks like we're going to be fighting again. He tiredly muttered. Similarly leaning on the gap of the battlement, I wordlessly stared at the barrier that was enveloping the mountain. Tell me about it. Perhaps only 8 hours passed since the last fight? I didn't count, but it was not too long. Most people were tired, and the terrible weather was not helping. Neither of us spoke for the next couple of minutes. That was until I recalled something. Before I forget, take this. Tapping on my bracelet, I handed Leopold an object. At the moment it was covered with the cloth that Malvol used to cover the sword. This was a little something I bought back at the utility center. Thought that it would be a perfect fit for Leopold. Tilting his head, Leopold asked.
What
is this? Have a look. Nudging my head, I mysteriously smiled. Okay. Taking the object, Leopold slowly removed the cloth, revealing a slick black artifact that resembled a one-handed shotgun. Leopold's eyes opened widely. Phew. He then proceeded to whistle as a small smile appeared on his face. Caressing the artifact, he couldn't help but compliment it. Hot damn, this is beautiful. Lowering my hand and staring at the artifact in his hand, a smile crept on my face. I knew you'd like it. Chapter 310, Activating the Defensive System, 2. I thought that it might come in handy to you. After having witnessed the prowess of the dwarves with their gun-like artifacts, I thought that it would have been a perfect fit for Leopold, who usually always helped out from the back. This way, he wouldn't need to join the fights when commanding the others directly. Aiming the gun around, Leopold asked. What are the requirements for using this little thing? Just inject some mana, and it'll work. It's a D-ranked artifact. The artifact was something that only dwarves could create and essentially worked as a gun. Upon injecting mana into the device, the artifact would activate, releasing the bullets that were loaded inside. Well, that's how it should work. Never used it, so I didn't know. Take good care of it, it cost me quite a lot. Aiming the gun towards the distance, Leopold put his finger on the trigger. Sounds easy enough. Well, I still think you need time to get used to it. Just like any weapon, it needed time to be mastered, and although Leopold was already good with the sword, at the end of the day, his talent did not lay in swordsmanship but in commanding. Plus, just because he was now using a gun, it didn't mean that he couldn't use a sword. He could very well use it during short-range fights and then replace it when he's helping out from the back. After all, the gun would be more useful when he's commanding a lot of people at once. Looking through the status of the gun, Leopold suddenly asked. How's the recoil on this thing? How about you try? I also was curious about this. Raising his brow and looking around, Leopold picked his ear to ensure he didn't hear wrongly. Try? Here? I don't think anyone would mind being honest. Just shoot the air. We were in the open, and most likely, the sound that would come out from shooting the weapon would get drowned out by the sound of the rain. Furthermore, I don't think the dwarfs would mind this. Guess you're right. Leopold was a simple person. At my words, he stopped thinking too much and put a bullet inside of the gun-like artifact. Chee-chuck. Loading the artifact, Leopold aimed towards the distance with one hand. His semi-long hair was already wet from the rain. Closing one of his eyes and aiming towards the barrier in the distance, he softly muttered. I'm going. Looking at him and taken aback by the fact that he was only using one hand, I blurted out. Wait, why are you using only one hand? Just cause. As soon as his words faded, a gentle hue shrouded his hand, directly entering the artifact. Click. Leopold then pressed on the trigger. Boom. Accompanied by a thunderous sound, a blue ball of energy shot out from the gun, directly aiming for the barrier in the distance. Traveling at incredible speeds, the blue energy traveled through the air, splitting the rain apart. Before long, it appeared right before the barrier. However, right as the energy was about to hit the barrier, something miraculous happened. The blue ball stopped midair before suddenly disappearing out of thin air. On the other hand, while the energy ball shot out from the gun, Leopold, the one responsible for the shot, was sent a couple of steps back. Ugh! As he was pushed back, he let out a groan. Once he managed to rebalance himself, staring at the gun in his hand, he couldn't help but curse out loud. Bloody hell! Massaging his right wrist, the one that held onto the artifact, he softly muttered. The recoil on this thing. Maybe you held it wrong? Perhaps we can go ask the dwarves for things that can be added to reduce the recoil? Although I wasn't an expert with guns, I do think that the way that Leopold held onto the gun was wrong. Right as he took a shot, his hand flung all the way up in the air, and he was pushed away quite far. Maybe try using both hands next time and keep your feet planted on the ground. From the looks of it, he still needed a lot of practice before using the gun properly. If every time he shot this happened, there was no use in him keeping the artifact. Still massaging his wrist, Leopold nodded his head in agreement. You're right, I need to practice more. MHM. Turning my head and glancing at the barrier that had now enveloped the whole mountain, I muttered. Since the dwarfs are planning on using the barrier, you've got some time to practice. Depending on how long the dwarves were planning on keeping the barrier, I estimated that we had at least a day to ourselves. Right until the weather cleared up. If I'm not wrong, the dwarves have chosen to erect the barrier because of the weather. So we've got till it stops raining to get prepared. Thought so too. Tossing a small box in Leopold's direction, I reminded. If you're planning on practicing, please don't carelessly treat the bullets as though they are as easy to get as water. They are actually quite expensive. So expensive that if converted into U, it would total around 500,000 U per bullet. Sounded expensive, but there was a reason for this. According to Malvol, the cores gained from beasts and monsters could be turned into powder, which would in turn function as gunpowder. In fact, demon cores could also do this. The reason why I had quite a lot of bullets on me was because I traded them for the core of the Baron-ranked demon that I killed. At first, I thought of giving it to Angelica, but at the mere mention of it, she threw me a disgusted look. Fair enough, though, after all, even I wouldn't be very excited at the prospect of eating another human. On another note, the bullets could only be created by the dwarves as humans were incapable of creating them. At least not yet. This was also why humans didn't have guns as of yet. Humans could at most create bows or other relatively simpler weapons. Things such as guns didn't only require a skilled blacksmith but also advanced engineering skills that understood the core underlying principles of mana, which humanity severely lacked. This was understandable, though. After all, humanity had only been exposed to mana for less than a century. Patting Leopold on the shoulder, I spoke. Take good care, Uck. Cutting me off, an electric current suddenly ran through my body and head. My knees buckled, and I almost tripped on the ground. Fortunately, Leopold, who was next to me, caught me by the arm. Wow, Ren, you okay? He worriedly asked. Unfortunately for him, I couldn't respond. Ren? Ren. Clenching my teeth, Leopold's voice was faint in my ears. My vision blurred slightly as well. To my luck, this did not last for long as I soon got myself together. Taking a moment to rebalance myself, I reassured Leopold that I was fine. Ren, are you okay?
Ha! Ha!
Thanks, but I'm now fine. Holding onto my head, I painfully muttered. It's just that my head suddenly started to hurt. Probably didn't have enough sleep. Leopold put the gun away and carefully looked at me. Since we have some time, you should probably get some rest.
Yeah.
You okay, now?
Yeah.
No problem. I forced a smile and stood up straight. The pain left as fast as it came. Though skeptical, Leopold no longer asked about my condition. Putting the bullets away, he looked at the entrance of the tower in the distance. I'll go check on the others now. Got it. If you need anything, tell me. Giving me a simple nod, Leopold soon walked away. Staring at Leopold's back, the smile on my face disappeared as my brows knit tightly. What was that? Was it because my head was still messed up due to what had happened at the monolith, or was it something else entirely? The pain was somewhat familiar. Though I couldn't explain it, it felt as though I had a similar headache in the past. Just what in the world? The more I thought about it, the deeper my frown grew. Was there something wrong with me? Or was this really something due to my tiredness? For now, I wasn't sure, but I sure hoped that it was the latter and that this was just a one-off occasion. Boom! It was then that an explosion suddenly sounded. Following this, the whole city shook. Turning my head and staring in the direction of where the sound originated from, I saw a faint ripple appear on the enormous barrier enveloping the entire mountain. Spreading throughout the whole barrier, miniature waves appeared on the barrier before disappearing not long after. It appeared to me that the barrier had absorbed the attack from before. Gazing in the direction of where the ripple centered, my brows furrowed tightly. They've started the siege. Lock, Leviathan building. See, I click.
Ha!
Entering his apartment, Kevin let out an exhausted sigh. He had trouble walking at the moment, and if not for the fact that he had consumed a potion, he wouldn't have made it back to his dorm room. She could have gone easier on me. Kevin muttered underneath his breath as he entered the bathroom. Donna's training as the years progressed did not become easier but became even more arduous than before.
Ugh.
It stinks. Taking off his clothes, Kevin's face grimaced slightly. He was currently wearing his training clothes, as such, having sweated the whole day, they stunk.
Shh.
Taking a step into the shower and turning on the shower valve, water soon started dropping towards his body. Taking the shampoo resting on the right side of the shower room, Kevin began to wash his hair. As he was showering, he couldn't help but think about what had happened to him in the past year. It's been over a year since Ren's death, and a lot has changed. He was now almost a third year, and during the past 2 years, he did nothing but train. Originally, he was supposed to go to an exchange during the second year, but it was cancelled because of the lock incident. As such, he was stuck at the lock. It was probably for the best, though. He could feel himself improving every day with Donna overlooking his training. On another note, Jean had now also joined the training sessions, and both of them had been growing at astonishing speeds. But still not enough. Kevin was not satisfied. Tightening his grip on the shower head, Kevin bit his lips. A certain memory flashed, and his face darkened considerably. "How's your friend doing?" Aaron muttered in a mocking tone not too long ago, during the second-year inter-academy exchange. As expected, he was the one responsible for killing Ren. His mocking words still resonated across Kevin's ears to this day. Bang! Punching the side of the wall, the sound of Kevin's teeth grinding up together was drowned out by the sound of the water hitting the bottom of the shower. Tick, tick, tick. I'll definitely. Kevin swore to himself as he clenched his fists tightly. Chick. Hoo. Calming down and turning off the shower valve, Kevin exited the shower and dried his hair with a towel. Taking another towel and tying it around his waist, droplets of water trickled down his chiseled body. Walking out of the bathroom, Kevin ruffled his hair and threw the towel on top of a chair. Whom, it's already quite late. Yawning, Kevin checked the time. 10:30 p.m. Entering his bedroom, Kevin changed into more comfortable clothes and decided to go to sleep. However, just as he was about to go to bed, he noticed something strange. Turning his head, Kevin tilted his head in confusion. Before long, his eyes became sharp, and he cautiously looked towards his surroundings. After making sure that no one was present, he turned his attention back towards his bed, where a red book he had never seen before rested. What is? Chapter 311, Synchronization 1. A book he had never seen before lay on his bed. Who put this here? Kevin muttered out loud as he turned his head around and once again scanned the whole room from top to bottom. Did anybody come here without my permission? He wondered to himself. Even though he had never seen the book before, the more he stared at it, the more entranced with it he became. It was as though the book was begging for him to pick it up. This made Kevin more and more apprehensive about the book. There was something wrong with it. Yet. He took a step forward. Towards the book. Gulp. Stopping right at the edge of his bed, he swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Bah, dumb. Bah, dumb. Bah, dumb. Unbeknownst to him, his heart started to beat faster. It wasn't out of fear nor nervousness, but something different. Something he couldn't explain. Hoo. Taking a deep breath, Kevin reached out for the book. Even though his mind was telling him not to touch the book, his body moved on its own, refusing to listen to him. It was as though someone was controlling his body. His fingers soon touched the book, and it was at the exact moment that a static current ran down his body. Arg. Pain. An almost unbearable pain coursed through his brain, threatening to tear it apart. Huiawaf. Thud. Falling face first onto the ground, Kevin directly passed out. The pain was too much for him to handle. Next to him, the now open red book mysteriously glowed. As though a breeze of air had entered the room, the pages soon started to flip by themselves. Only darkness enveloped Kevin's thoughts and mind for an unknown period of time. He couldn't hear, see, or feel anything. Like when he was traveling through a portal, his mind drifted through an endless void. Kevin. A faint voice reached Kevin's ears. It was a familiar voice, one that he had heard not too long ago. Kevin. The voice once again called out for his name. This time the voice was a lot clearer. Kevin's mind slowly cleared up, and he opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw a devastatingly beautiful girl looking at him at nose length. With a small pout, she muttered. Geez, class is about to start. Just for how long are you planning on sleeping for? Emma? Kevin blinked a couple of times. Raising his head, he glanced around. Then, much to his surprise, he found himself inside of the classroom. He couldn't quite remember what happened before that. Strange. He muttered as he looked around the classroom. What's strange? Emma tilted her head. Her short auburn hair gently fell on her shoulder. Kevin pointed at the classroom. Did we have this many people in our class before? What are you on about? Emma's brows furrowed. She then put her hand on his forehead. You're acting strange, Kevin. Are you sure you're okay? But... Clank. But before Kevin could ask any more questions, the door to the classroom opened up, and a familiar figure walked in. It was Donna. Entering the class with her usual elegance, she gathered the attention of all of the boys in class. All right, class is about to start. Everyone, please be seated. With both hands by the side of the podium, Donna's amethyst-colored eyes scanned the room. Soon her eyes paused on Kevin and the others. A satisfied smile appeared on her face. Let's start with the register. Tapping on her tablet, Donna started doing the register. This was a routine that everyone was used to. Rank 1, Kevin Voss. Present. Kevin instinctively answered. His mind was still a mess. No matter how much he tried to remember what had happened the moments before waking up in the classroom, he couldn't remember. Something was wrong, but he couldn't quite place his finger on what was wrong. Rank 17, Troy Durex. Donna called out, to which a youth with yellow eyes raised his hand and responded. Present. Rank 18. As time passed, Donna continued to do the register. Kevin, who was lost in his own thoughts, frowned as he listened to the register. Why is it taking so long? Usually, the registration would have taken a lot less time. Instead, it was taking a lot more time than expected. It was then that something caught his attention. No, rather, it took away all of his attention. Rank 1750, Rindover. Present. Kevin instinctively stood up and looked towards where the voice came from. Sure enough, he didn't hear wrongly. Sitting on the left side of the classroom by himself was a youth with deep blue eyes and jet black hair. Leaning back, he had an expression of someone who was super bored. He was exactly as Kevin remembered him. Ren. You're alive. Kevin wanted to shout out loud as he looked at him. However, he refrained himself. That was because he suddenly realized that something was wrong with the situation. Is there something wrong, Kevin? Donna asked by the podium as her brow raised. Staring back at Donna and realizing that everyone in the classroom was looking at him, including Ren, Kevin seriously shook his head before pointing at Emma beside him. No, it's nothing. Emma poked me by the side. Huh. Kevin's answer caused Emma to be flustered. Her face became red, and she menacingly glared at Kevin. Why, you? Sit down for now. Donna impatiently said from the front of the class. Maybe it was because she favored Kevin due to his hard work, but she didn't pursue the matter anymore. Thank you, Mississippi. Kevin sat down, much to Emma's annoyance. Leaning towards Kevin, Emma hatefully glared at him. You better explain to me why you sold me out like that. Sorry, I owe you one. Unfortunately for Emma, Kevin did not care that he had sold her out as he immediately apologized and went back to his own world. Despite the many times that Emma wanted to talk to him, Kevin was too busy being in his own world to respond. At the moment, his mind was a mess. He couldn't think of anything else. Less needed to be said about Emma. Glancing at his watch, Kevin checked the date. September 24th, 2055. Gulp. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva. 2055. The date coincided with the time of his first year of the academy. Have I gone back in time? Or is this a dream? An illusion? UK. Pinching the left side of his cheek to make sure he wasn't dreaming, Kevin opened his eyes widely when he realized that he was actually feeling the pain. This wasn't a dream. Everything that was happening around him was real. Supporting his head with both hands, Kevin's mind blanked. He didn't know what was going on. Just what in the world is happening, and why am I here? A flood of questions rammed through his mind as he tried his best to remember what happened before arriving here. But, regardless of how much he tried, his mind remained blank. Kevin. Startling him out of his thoughts was Emma's annoyed voice. Throwing him an annoyed look, Emma packed up her things before standing up and sulkily leaving the classroom. I was planning on asking you whether you wanted to follow me back to the dorm, but it looks like you're not in the right mind today. Before Kevin could reply, she had already left. Glancing around, Kevin realized that most of the class had already left as well. Before he knew it, the class had already ended. I should also get going. Standing up, Kevin packed up his stuff and exited the classroom. Once he exited the building, the all-too-familiar academy campus was what met his sight. Everywhere he looked, everything felt the same as back in the real world. The same clean air, the same smell nature-like coming from the vegetation, and the same noisy students who hung out after class. Nothing was out of place. Kevin absent-mindedly walked around the academy campus for the next hour or so. Throughout the walk, his mind tried to come up with as many reasons as possible as to why he had gone back in time, but regardless of how much he tried to rack his brain over the matter, he couldn't figure it out. Just why was he here? It was then that before he knew it, he had stopped in front of an unfamiliar building. Rather, he had seen the building before but had never actually set foot inside of it. Horned sheep was engraved by the gates of the buildings. Staring at the sign, Kevin's brows jumped up slightly. If I'm not wrong, this is where Ren lived during this time period. Back when he was still hiding his strength. Unbeknownst to him, he stopped right in front of the building Ren was living in. He didn't know why or how, but his instincts told him that this was the place that would clue him about the reason why he was here. See, I clink. Entering the building, Kevin walked up to the dorm guardian and flashed his student ID. Excuse me, may I know which room a student named Rendover stays? Since it wasn't secret information, the clerk at the front desk of the Horned Sheep building immediately told Kevin where Ren's room was. It also had to be noted that Kevin's status was extremely high. Being the number 1 ranked student, his status was far above some of the other students. As the building guardian spoke to Kevin, he maintained a cardinal, subservient attitude. If you follow that path, you will be able to find student Rendover's room. Thank you. Thanking the guardian, Kevin followed the guardian's instructions and soon arrived before Ren's room. Hoo. Stopping in front of the room, Kevin took a deep breath. This was the first time he was going to talk to Ren ever since his death. If he said he was nervous, that would have been a lie. But more than anything else, this anticipation within him dispelled any nervousness within him. Finally, he was once again going to see his best friend. Kevin just wanted to talk to him even if he was a fake and didn't remember him. He just wanted to see his friend. To talk. He knocked on the door. But he got no response. Is he not back yet? Kevin thought to himself. Given that the Horned Sheep building had no private training facilities, Ren could have probably gone towards the public training area to train. Checking the time, 6:30 p.m., Kevin realized that this was probably the case. I guess I'll go CH. However, just when he was about to leave to check the training grounds, the door opened. Creak. Kevin's footsteps halted. Turning around, he called out. Ren? No response. Frowning, Kevin opened the door slightly. Ren, are you in TH, huh? The moment Kevin opened the door, Kevin's mouth shut, and a shocking scene appeared before his eyes. Laying on the cold floor with terror-struck eyes was Ren. Standing on top of him was a black humanoid figure with a sadistic smile on his face. Took you long enough. As the humanoid figure turned its head to face Kevin, a raspy voice rang out. Raising its long skinny arm and pointing it towards Kevin, the black humanoid's figure smile widened. Seemingly taking pleasure in seeing Kevin's shocked face. Coo, this is on you. Ugh. Grabbing Ren's figure on the floor by the neck, the sadistic smile on the black humanoid figure widened. Staring at Kevin who was on the opposite side, the grip of Ren's neck tightened. I am the sin you created. As those words sounded, chills ran down Kevin's spine. Licking his lips, the humanoid figure turned its attention back towards Ren and tightened the grip on his neck. Yuck. I am the consequence of your actions. Glaring at the black humanoid figure, Kevin snapped out of it and screamed at the top of his lungs. Don't you'd spurt. But it was too late. Before Kevin could do anything, Ren's head exploded into millions of pieces.
No.
Kevin's blood-curdling scream rang out. Not long after, the world started crumbling down. However, right before the world could completely crumble, the same raspy voice traveled through Kevin's ears. Never forget, I am the one sin you will never get rid of. Chapter 312, Synchronization, 2. Ashen gray clouds covered the sky as a gloomy atmosphere enveloped the world. Why-ing. Suddenly, a brilliant light spread shot out, spreading within the empty air. Following this, a terrifying pressure rose, causing the gray clouds to disperse. Within the light was a human figure whose features were indiscernible. Yet, the pressure that the figure gave out caused the air to vibrate. Whoever the figure was, they were an absolute master. Soon enough, the human figure within the brilliant light became increasingly clear as the light dimmed down. Finally, the light converged towards the figure, and a black-clothed male with 2 crimson-colored eyes clearly appeared in the air. Lifting his head, the crimson-eyed figure looked towards the distance with unprecedented seriousness. "Rise up." It was then that a hand suddenly stretched out of thin air, grasping the sky, and tearing it apart as though it was tangible. White hair, red blood eyes, and fair skin. Stepping out of the void was a figure resembling a human. Although he appeared extremely ordinary, only a genuine expert could sense just what kind of terrifying existence he was. The strength contained within his skinny body could wipe the whole world with a single wave of his hand. It was terrifying. Indifferently floating in the sky and staring below, what met the white-haired figure's sight was destruction. A world that was now on the verge of destruction. A smile formed on his face. Then, lowering his head and staring at the crimson-colored male below him, the white-haired individual's eyes rippled slightly. The crimson-colored male stared back, and silence enveloped the world. Neither spoke, but tremendous energy shot out from each of the 2 figures' bodies before silently clashing together. A formidable ripple spread out from the clash of the 2, and everything below them disintegrated. Finally, after an unknown period of time, the crimson-colored male opened his mouth. Jezebeth. His soft voice traveled through every corner of the world. Yet, deep-seated hatred could be felt in his voice as he spoke. Staring at the red-eyed individual below, the white-haired figure closed his eyes slightly before the smile on his face deepened ever so slightly. "How have you been? It's been a while since we've last seen each other." Before the white-haired figure could finish speaking, his mouth suddenly stopped moving, and the world crumbled down.
Ha! Ha!
Abruptly opening his eyes, Kevin sat upright. His breathing was rough, and his clothes were drenched in sweat. What just happened? Kevin's eyes were bloodshot. Frantically looking around, Kevin found himself back in his own room. Or at least that's what it looked like. But he no longer knew. Lowering his head, Kevin looked at the watch that was resting on his wrist. Tapping on it, he quickly checked the year. 2057. Am I back? Staring at the year, Kevin did not immediately rejoice. Instead, taking out his phone, he quickly skimmed through his chat logs to see if everything was the same as it was before. Wii U. Upon checking and seeing that everything was just as he remembered, he finally let out a sigh of relief. He was finally back in the original timeline. Standing up, he sat back on his bed and muttered out loud. Just what in the world happened? His brows couldn't help but furrow. Many questions he had no answer to flooded his mind. Ugh. Clenching his teeth, Kevin groaned as his head started to ache. Fortunately, it was a lot milder than before. But it was also due to this headache that he finally remembered how everything started. Everything started the moment he picked up the red book on his bed. It was then that all the strange things happened. The humanoid creature, the white-haired figure, Rin, the book. They were all things he had never seen before, yet, why did they feel so familiar? As though he had already seen them once before? Just what is happening? Kevin clenched his head with both hands as he tried to rack his brains around the matter. The more he thought about it, the more his head ached. Gulp. Swallowing a mouthful of saliva, Kevin tried to distract himself from the topic. Unfortunately, every time he started thinking about what had just happened, the headaches would start. He couldn't bear them. Turning towards his right, to his horror, Kevin spotted the red book from before. Instantly his eyes shot wide open, and he moved back. As far away from the book as possible. Soon enough, sweat dripped from the side of his face as he looked at the book with deep apprehension. Unlike last time, it was now open, and from the looks of it, there seemed to be something written on it. But maybe it was his imagination since it wasn't clear from the angle he was looking at. Hoo. Staring at the book from afar, Kevin took a deep breath and calmed himself down.
I
need to calm down. Closing his eyes, he took another breath before standing up. Opening his eyes, he stared at the book opposite of him. He then took a step forward. Although he knew that the book was dangerous, his curiousness overtook his rationality. He wanted to understand what had just happened to him. Something wasn't right. Cautiously walking towards the book, Kevin refrained from touching it and peeked at it from above. He wanted to see what was written on it. Sure enough, as soon as he looked at it from above, he could see words written on them. Furrowing his brows, he slowly started to read the book. == Boom. The barrier shook and a ripple once again formed on the thin barrier enveloping the mountain. Who stood atop the northern tower seriously looked at the chaos in the distance. Dasha. 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 The rain continued to plummet hard, hitting the barrier from above. Closing his eyes, tied his black hair behind his head and rested the blunt sword he got from Malval by the side of the wall. Sitting down on the ground, leaned his back against the wall and closed his eyes. == Reading the book, Kevin tilted his head. Is this a novel? He thought. But he quickly shook his head. Something didn't add up. Why was the name of the person in the book blacked out? Lowering his body, Kevin tried to get a better look at the book. However, regardless of how much he tried to read the name, Kevin could not see who the story was about. It was as though a veil was preventing from seeing it. Ding! It was then that he suddenly heard a chime ring inside of his head, and a small screen appeared before him. Lifting his head and staring at the screen, Kevin's pupils dilated. == Synchronization, 22%. Demon King Ascension. 10 years, 287 days, 8 hours, 45 seconds. 8 years, 287 days, 8 hours, 45 seconds. == What the? Henler. After an unknown period of time had passed, a familiar voice reached my ears. They're removing the barrier in 10. I opened my eyes and found Hein and the others standing opposite of me. Stretching my arms, I asked. Has the rain stopped? No, not yet, but it's better than before. Ava replied as she looked into the distance. Lifting my head and staring at Ava, I noticed that her hair was a lot shorter than before. About shoulder length. When did you cut your hair? Oh, this? Ava touched her hair and casually replied. I realized in our last fight that long hair hinders my eyesight, so I decided to cut it. Fair enough. Ava's words reminded me of my long hair. Though they didn't really hinder me during fights, maybe it was about time to have them cut as well. Or maybe not, who knows. On another note, staring at Ava opposite me, it only dawned on me now that I was talking to her just how much she changed over the last few months. She talked a lot more confidently than before, and what was more impressive were her eyes. They sparkled with a never-seen-before light. "Oh well, you do whatever is best for you." Raising my hand and gripping onto something, I supported my body up. Turning around and gazing into the distance, I could see that the weather had cleared up a bit. Although it was raining, it was a lot milder than before. I could now at least see what was happening in the distance. Resting his shield by the side of the wall, Hein suddenly asked, "Are we going to do the same thing as last time? Like going outside to fight?" "No, that would be suicidal. That reckless approach was only okay during the first wave, but the second wave would be a lot more difficult than the first wave. Count and Viscount ranked demons would join the fray. Unfortunately, they weren't something I could handle at my current capabilities." "Understood, so what are we going to do?" I pointed towards the distance where a bunch of orcs stood. "Hold the line with the orcs. It should still serve as good training. Unlike last time, this time our job was to hold the front line with the others. Since we couldn't be as reckless as before due to the increased difficulty of the opponents, the least we could do to secure our safety was to work with the others. Although I was confident in the abilities of the others, I didn't want them to die. We could fight without worrying too much if we worked together with the orcs." Turning my head left and right, I curiously asked, "By the way, has anyone seen Small Snake and Ryan?" "Haven't seen them since they left. They're with the dwarves," Leopold lazily replied. "They didn't want to wake you up, so they told me to tell you that they are fine." "Is that so? I guess that makes sense." I had a sudden understanding. Most likely Ryan and Small Snake had impressed the dwarves with their abilities. So much that they probably forced them to stay downstairs. That was good. The more they learned, the better for me. Who knows, maybe Ryan could figure something out about the chip in my head. On a good note, regarding the chip, as of right now, the only information the monolith had on me was the fact that I was currently somewhere around here. From what Ryan told me before, it seems like the city system could somewhat disrupt the connection of the chip in my head. Although it didn't completely stop the chip, it at least made sure that the monolith had no idea of where exactly I was. Even so, it didn't really matter. The monolith was a human association. Regardless of how much they wanted to try to investigate in this city, they'd come out empty-handed. After all, the dwarves weren't just going to let them do as they please. This was especially so when there was an ongoing war at the moment. It wasn't like they would open the gates just for them. At the moment, the city was sealed, and no one could enter. Plus, even though there was an organization similar to the monolith in the dwarven domain, they wouldn't go out of their way to help the humans. They had more important things to do, like trying to interfere with the war. Therefore, as of now, I didn't have to worry about the monolith. This was also why I wasn't in a rush to get the chip removed. Might as well have Ryan remove it for me. Well, I was obviously going to consult a dwarf before that. So if they really could do it and Ryan was too busy, I may as well let them do it. By the way, Small Snake told me to give you this. Leopold suddenly took out a small black badge. "What's this?" I curiously asked as I looked at the black badge. Handing it to me, Leopold explained. Small Snake said that if you wanted to visit him in the control room, you could directly give this to the guards standing outside, and they would grant you access. How thoughtful. I muttered as I took the badge from Leopold's hands. Then, I picked up the blunt sword that was resting by the side of the wall and headed downstairs. As long as they are fine, then everything is good, oh right? Halting my steps, I suddenly recalled something. Turning my head, I reminded. Don't forget to get as many achievements points as possible. There were a lot of good rewards after all. Chapter 313, The Second Wave 1. Standing behind a line of orcs on the tower's ground floor, I turned towards Leopold, who was next to me. I then pointed at the gun in his hand. "How's it going with that thing?" Playing with the gun, Leopold flashed a satisfied smile. "It's not bad, not bad. See, I chick." Taking the bullets out of the gun, Leopold tossed the gun in my direction. "Here, have a look at it yourself." Catching the gun with one hand, I took a good look at the gun. The design of the gun was, how should I say, crude. Not sure if that was the right word. It looked a bit like some of the older guns that existed back in the past. Of course, that was only aesthetically. In reality, the gun was far more advanced than any gun that had ever existed. More powerful, as well as each bullet could penetrate the skin of a demon. Tossing the gun back to Leopold, I curiously asked, "Have you found a solution for the recoil issue?" "Sort of." "Oh. Do tell me, I'm genuinely curious. Kind of wanted a gun myself, if I had to be honest. However, I wasn't sure just how useful it would be to me. Most probably, it wouldn't, but it looked nice." Unaware of what I was thinking, Leopold pointed at the dwarves behind him. "I talked to them and they told me that there are things we can buy to increase the weight of the gun and reduce the recoil. The only problem is that it cost a lot of money." "That isn't that much of a problem. I think I have enough." Before I could finish, Leopold cut me off. "I also thought about asking you for money, but then it suddenly hit me." "What?" Out of nowhere, taking out a cigarette from his dimensional space, Leopold lit it. "Sick. Sick. Puff." Taking a small puff, the smoke slowly diffused in the air. "Sorry, bit stressed." Saying that, he proceeded to take his sword out. He then waved it at me. Since I can also use the sword, as soon as I use the gun, I'll store it in my dimensional space. Then, I can just take the gun back after things calm down. Leopold's response was out of my expectations. Alternating my gaze between his ring and the gun, my head tilted in confusion. "That works?" "Yup. I've tried. It's one of the tips that the dwarves have given me. The only problem is the reloading, which takes time." "Okay. If the dwarves said that it worked, then it probably did. However, I'd assume this strategy only works for people like Leopold, who could use two weapons." "Why I am." It was then that suddenly a strange noise enveloped the battlefield. Puff. Leopold, who was next to me, took another puff of his cigarette. He didn't even need to look to understand what was happening. "Looks like we're about to start." As soon as his words faded, the barrier in the distance slowly started to disappear. What lay behind it were over thousands and upon thousands of demons. The air instantly became tense, and the mana in the air started to thicken up. The second wave was just about to begin. Inside of an unknown room in the city. "Shut down the barriers, the weather has cleared up." A red-haired dwarf walked towards the beacon and placed his hand on it. 92% was engraved in the middle of the beacon, signifying how much energy it had left. Crew kook. Soon enough, the moment the red-haired dwarf's hand touched the beacon let out a strange noise, and the light that shot upwards slowly started to dim down. Gazing up towards the hole where the beam shot out, the red-haired dwarf muttered, "We've already lost 8%. Oh, the energy this early into the war. It still be fine for now. What's really important be that we withstand the second wave," replied another dwarf with black braided hair. "Ye think so?"
Yeah.
According to him, as long as they did not suffer substantial losses in the second wave, and they didn't activate the barrier once again, they'd have a good shot at the war. Crossing his arms and sitting on a stool, the red-haired dwarf tiredly asked, "How many more waves do you think there's gonna be?" Tap, tap, tap. Tapping on the table, the braided-haired dwarf thought for a moment before answering truthfully. I'm nae sure, but I do believe that the war will continue for at least a year. It wasn't just them that were at war, but the orcs and elves too. Each side had sent some people to help out, but from the looks of it, things wouldn't clear up for at least a while. For a war of this magnitude, it would take at least a year to see which side would have the upper hand. Till and we do our best to nae use the barrier. The less they used the barrier, the more impact it would have during the climax of the war. If they used up all the energy now, the shield might fail when it truly mattered. This was undesirable. Turning his attention back towards the beacon, the red-haired dwarf solemnly nodded his head. I agree. Northern Tower Control Room. You two get ready, the real battle starts now. Yes. Small Snake and Ryan quickly went to their stations at Bemis's instructions. Unlike before, their station was a lot more spacious, and the map they were working with was a lot more advanced. Bemis stood behind them with his arms crossed. Since I've seen your skills, I'm going to give ye two a heavier task. Pointing at the map in front of them, Bemis explained. Your task be to analyze the strategy the enemy be using. If ye can find anything suspicious in their movements, tell me. This was by no means an easy task. Not only did this require extreme concentration, but also good spatial awareness and good analytical and calculative abilities. To find out an enemy strategy, you had to look at the bigger picture as well as the smaller details. Even a single detail needed to be spotted. If that one detail was missed, then the enemy strategy would succeed. I trust that both ye can do it. Bemis's words were proof that he trusted them. Of course, he had other people working on the same task and it wasn't only unique to them, but this was him telling Small Snake and Ryan that he regarded them as highly as the other members. Before leaving, taking out a small card from his pocket, Bemis handed it to Small Snake. Human, take this. This card will give ye access to the map the other towers including the northern one. If everything looks regular in the northern tower, do check other towers as well. We're currently short on hands and any information be appreciated. Sometimes, just looking at one section wasn't enough to figure out an opponent's strategy. By giving them access to the whole mapping of the walls, he was helping them have a clearer outlook of the situation. Understood. Small Snake fully understood this. Taking the card, he solemnly looked at Bemis. I'll do my best. Good, I've taken enough your time. I'll be leaving now. Nodding in satisfaction, Bemis turned around and headed towards the other areas to give out similar instructions to the other dwarfs. Ryan, help me out. Turning his attention back towards the control panel, Small Snake quickly got to work. Squinting his eyes, he slowly started analyzing the details of the map in front of him. Azrin said, this was a good experience for him. Boom! Different colored lights enveloped the city's outer walls as both sides attacked. Standing at the bottom level of the tower, I gazed into the distance. Next to me were Hein, Ava, and Leopold. Angelica was also here, but she was in her ring form, and she couldn't quite show herself just yet. Furthermore, even if she did show herself, she'd be pretty useless since it took a lot of time for her to regain her abilities. The downside of her ability was that in order to make herself appear as an ordinary ring, she had to get rid of most of her demonic energy. In short, she'd be returning to her usual form with practically zero demonic energy in her. Not exactly that, but close to it. In a situation such as this, that was practically suicide. On a good note, the others seemed to be less nervous about the upcoming fight than before. Perhaps fighting in the first wave was a good decision since it gave them more confidence. Glancing at my sword, my brows furrowed. What should I do with this? I was now fighting without any sword art and an almost broken sword. If I had to be honest, I wasn't very confident about the upcoming fight. Not only were my opponents stronger than before, but my handicap grew even larger. Even then, I wasn't scared. If this was what it took to become stronger, so be it. Wham! At that moment, a sea of demons fastly approached the tower. Then, like a flock of birds, they mercilessly sped towards where we were. Whying? At the top of the tower, all sorts of spells and forms of energy beams shot towards the approaching mass of demons. The land trembled. Black blood that was accompanied by the corpses of the demons poured down from the sky like a storm. The misty black blood enveloped the entire northern area as more and more demons fell towards the ground. Most shockingly, even though the demons were dying at an alarming rate, they continued to move towards the tower fearlessly. It was as though they had no sense of death. Before long, the number of demons had decreased drastically, but the land they covered also increased. It wasn't long till they arrived before the tower. Shh! *T. Once they were only a few meters away from us, I turned to look at the others and warned. They're coming, get ready, you guys. Stay close to each other. My words were soon drowned out by the whistling sound that arose from the sky as the demons dived down from the sky. Wham! Like black bullets, within seconds, they arrived before the first defensive line. FWAP. Spreading their wings open, their body came to an abrupt halt. A black hue spread from their body as they clawed the orcs waiting at the front lines. Hein! I shouted. 3 demons were headed in our direction. On it, hew up. At my call, Hein took a step forward and cried out. Clang! Holding the shield in front of him, Hein's shield smashed against 2 demons, sending them back a couple of steps. Before I could say anything else, with a cigarette in his mouth, Leopold held the gun with one hand and pressed the trigger. Whiz! An energy beam shot out, piercing the demon right in the heart, killing it immediately. Just like Leopold had said before, the moment he shot the gun, he directly placed it in his dimensional space and took out his sword, cutting down the other demon that was attacking Hein. On the other hand, Ava took out her flute and summoned her beasts. Toodle-too. At her melodious tune, 3 wolves and a bird appeared in front of her. As soon as they were summoned, they attacked the other demon. Staring at them from behind, I shrugged my shoulders. Looks like they don't really need my help. I was originally planning on helping them out a bit, but it looks like I was overthinking. Sheeing. There were a total of 3 demons that had attacked us. 2 of them were blocked by Hein, with one dying by Leopold's hand and the second one fighting for its life against the 3 of them. The 3rd demon had obviously seen what had happened to his 2 comrades and chose to aim for my life directly, seemingly thinking that I was going to be an easier target. Heek! Raising its hand, the demon cried out and slashed in my direction. Instantly, 3 tangible energies shot towards me. Guess it's my turn. Staring at the incoming demon, raising the blunt sword in my hand, I slashed down.